Jonathon Gatehouse is in Rio for MacLean's, and seems to have survived so far. At least he's joining us, so that's a good sign. Your plane got there in time?
Yeah, I don't have one of those sad, put upon journalist horror stories to share. I got on a plane, it took off, it landed, I got here. So. Yeah,
it's funny. You know what? I've never had those either. Toilet always flushed, bed was always made, shower always worked, although I wasn't in Sochi. So, put an asterisk there.
Yeah. Well, I didn't have a shower curtain or a rod for a few days in Sochi, but that was the extent of the hardship.
And it's Russia. You don't need to shower anyhow. You could just fit in with the rest of the people.
Let's hear the calls.
416-870. It's just bad.
Yeah, I think I will say that it appears that they're flushing all of the sewage from the media village into the adjacent field. So it's getting a little ripe over here, but other than that, everything's fine.
Our friend Adrian Arsenault, CBC TV, took a helicopter trip above Rio with I don't know if it was a biologist, or an environmentalist, I should say. I was watching it in the National the other night, and they were up in a helicopter, and they could smell the sewage. They could smell the sewage in a helicopter, high in the air. Yeah. That is scary.
It's not difficult to figure out where it is. Every once in a while, you're even in a bus or passing along a roadway, you'll come across a ditch, and your nose instantly lets you know what you're dealing with.
Of course, the opening ceremonies are tonight. We're joined by Jonathon Gatehouse, who'll be covering the Olympics for MacLean's magazine. It seems as if Brazil, the organizing committee, I should say, it almost seems as if they're trying to spin these logistical and environmental issues. They're almost trying to spin them into some sort of indication of a more realistic or off-the-cuff Olympics approach. They've even tried to marry the whole thing to the IOC, the 2020 vision concept, which is essentially pays lip service to the idea of a scaled-down, a more realistic Olympics. We've heard about how the opening ceremonies are going to be more analog than digital, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How much of that is fact, and how much of it is just, as I said, just panic spinning of a situation that really isn't that good?
Well, listen, I think it's a bit of spin to try and put lipstick on the pig, but at the same time, the reality is that this is an Olympics without bells and whistles, and probably not even a kazoo. They ran out of money. I think the venues are going to be fine. It's the competition itself. That's where the money's been put into, and I think it's going to go off fine. And the venues, especially those like down in Copacabana, are really spectacular. At least the backdrop is spectacular. But when you come to things, there are no banners in this city, right? The things you're used to seeing in an Olympics with the logo plastered everywhere. Well, they don't have money for that. It's not here. And you mentioned the opening ceremony, right? It's going to be, I think, relatively bare bones, and they can't hide it because they just don't have the resources to deal with it.
In conversation with Jonathon Gatehouse and MacLean's, what are your initial reactions, or what were your initial your initial takeaways when you got to Brazil and you got out to see some of the facilities or the Olympic Village, or just getting out and about? Did you detect a thing that's just kind of a bubbling, brewing mess, or are we, Jonathon, talking about what we usually talk about at the Olympics? Every Olympics is going to be a calamity. There's going to be a terrorist attack. Things are going to fall apart. Cars aren't going to run, planes aren't going to fly, buildings aren't going to build, whatever it is. And, stuff generally ends up coming off okay. Are you detecting any difference with this?
No, I think it's really the latter, Jeff. This is going to go off. It's going to be fine. The athletes are going to perform. They're going to win medals, and everyone will instantly forget about all of the whining and carping and calamities that have been predicted. There are problems, as I say. The sewage is an obvious one. Transportation. This is a really sprawling, spread out city, and the venues are spread out, and getting from place to place for both for athletes and for media and for the people, the spectators, is going to be difficult. But at the end, I think so much of this seems to be through the lens of how first world nations, perceive faraway places. The same thing happened in Sochi, right? That Sochi was by no means like a perfect Olympics, but it was also the fear of terrorism that kept everyone away. Well, I mean, I don't know if I've ever been anywhere where I was safer, behind, multiple layers of barbed wire and, whatever it was, 100,000 cops and soldiers. It was, it's the same here in Rio. I mean, listen, last night a Russian vice consul, who was actually a Brazilian lawyer, shot and killed a robber just outside of the Rio Olympic site. But that seems to be the exception and not the rule.
Well, and there's, I mean, I was going to say there's street crime everywhere, and I think that's, I guess the concern on the part of a lot of people is that it appears as if Brazil, it's not just necessarily terrorism and the threat of a major attack, but it's the whole aspect of street crime. But people have been in cities where that had a reputation for street crime, places like Athens and things like that. And there are always going to be isolated incidents of people having money stolen or being pickpocketed or whatever. But it is true that eventually, once the competition starts, most of the focus tends to go to the athletes, and which is how it should be.
Yeah. Yeah, the security presence is huge. I spent the day kind of walking around down in Copacabana and Ipanema yesterday, and everywhere you went, almost every street corner either had a soldier or a group of cops standing there. Many of them armed with assault rifles. I don't think you don't feel unsafe here. I don't think tourists are going to feel unsafe. I don't think that there's that the incidents. I mean, this thing last night outside of the bar of the Olympic site was like a Jason Bourne takedown. I mean, this couple of guys on a motorcycle tried to come up and mug this guy and his family while he was caught in traffic in the car, and he fought them off using his jiu-jitsu skills, disarmed one of them, and shot him with his own gun.
That's awesome.
I mean, that's pretty spectacular, but again, I think that's going to be the exception.
And he's a lawyer?
He is a lawyer. I think he's in Lawyer Hall of Fame now.
I was going to say, that's a guy I want. That's a guy I want when I get a speeding ticket. Jonathon, the IOC yesterday decided to approve the entry of, I think, 270, something like that, Russian athletes after an international court of arbitration ruled against barring athletes with prior doping sanctions from competing. We're now in a position where there could be individual appeals of bans launched. We could essentially find ourselves going into an event where all of a sudden here comes, a Russian athlete wins his appeal and finds himself in the middle of the event. How much of an issue is this for the IOC, and how much is the whole question of steroids and drug testing hanging over these Olympics? Because it seems in a lot of ways it's always been an issue. We've always talked about it, but at least my experience in Beijing and London was it wasn't as out front as it is now.
Well, yeah, I think it's no longer a dirty secret, right? It's out in the open, and people have to deal with it. Predictably enough, the IOC lacked the moral courage to go the distance and do what they should have done in banning Russian athletes. They punted it to the various federations who, as you know, are not exactly paragons of virtue themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you can be relatively confident that this is going to be a cleaner games than it might have been otherwise. It won't be clean. They never are. But, there's the willing suspension of disbelief that takes over for fans and for the media. Things happen all the time in sports that are too good to be true. And we just tend to get caught up in the moment and go along with it. And, there will be moments here where people will come out of nowhere and shatter records that have stood forever and by a large margin. And mostly people will applaud and think that's great rather than maybe drawing the obvious conclusion that these things don't happen on their own.
Jonathon, we're going to let you scoot. I know you've got a couple of other media responsibilities today. Stay safe and enjoy the Olympics, and we'll be talking to you again.
Thanks, Jeff. What you want to check out for music, try, I found a new one, Low Cut Connie, Going Down to Rio.
Low Cut Connie?
Low Cut Connie, song's called Rio.
Okay, we're on that right now. Thanks. Take care.